So today, this afternoon, we have a presentation that's going to be given by Bobby Fortis. He's the Conservation Law Enforcement Officer located in Pinetop, Arizona. And he will give a presentation for us on the collection, security, and chain of custody of evidence that are seized throughout any type of law enforcement investigation. So with that said, Bobby, welcome, and I'll turn the reins over to you.
Thank you very much, Robert. As you said, my name is Robert Fortis. I go by Bobby. My position with Office of Law Enforcement is Conservation Law Enforcement Officer. My area of responsibilities in the Apache Sitgraves National Forest, which encompasses Arizona and the Gila National Forest in New Mexico. My main patrol function skills are to enhance the Mexican gray wolf population and the overt patrols, which is a lot different what the agents do as far as patrols go. I have experience working in different environments since 1998, from working in jails and collecting evidence. So we plan to discuss different scenarios inside collection, traffic stops if need be, and any questions arise, please feel free to bring them up as we go. And I just want to thank everybody for the opportunity to be here today and present. With that said, I have some contact information there, my cell phone number and a dispatch number. If you have any questions and you're seeing this slide show at a different time, feel free to contact me if you have any questions. Okay, so let's get started with evidence. Why do we need evidence? In an overview here, and conducting searches, proper packaging of your evidence, and some challenges that could occur when picking up this evidence as far as transporting, maybe a live specimen you're collecting, and documentation. This will be an overview of what we'll cover throughout this training. Start off with, what is evidence? It's an object or any physical characteristic that can be used to establish the commission or violation of a crime. And what we're trying to do is link items to a suspect or from a crime scene or an area, physical evidence to utilize that to prove the subject was at the location or to prove that they were involved in that crime. Why is it important to us? It's important because ultimately this evidence could be admissible in court. An improper processing of this evidence can make it vulnerable. They could challenge anything within the process of the collection to the portion of security. So we need this evidence to make our cases, and the chain of custody and documentation for this, it just ensures the integrity of the whole case, and it's a portion of it that we'll require. And some of the questions that you could be asked and how an attorney at the federal level, attorney's office, may want to introduce evidence would be by these simple 4 questions. If you think about it in a scenario here where you collected an item and now you're going to trial to a year later, let's say 18 months later, that's why we want to do as accurate as we can documentation so we can be able to answer these questions throughout this process. And ones, do you recognize that evidence? And the day you collect it, it's not a problem recognizing that evidence. But a year from now, 18 months from now, it may be difficult. So that's why you want to have good recollection of all your documentation, including the photographs and chain of custody with that. How do you recognize this exhibit to be? This is the way the attorney will present this evidence and introduce it into court so it's recognized as an item or an exhibit. What do you recognize this to be? For example, if it's some type of drug item you seized, how do you know it's that same drug item 18 months later? Well, you would have the markings on the bag and you can describe what you saw that day to your best ability to account back to the jury or the attorney's office to enter that item as an exhibit. And obviously, is that in the same condition? Hopefully that would be answered as it is. So as we're going through process scenes, there's couple components that will be vitally important. And the first is safety. And I'll talk about safety in a lot of different ways here. Safety for you as an individual, personal safety gear to be safe from chemicals or hazards, but also terrain safety to including weather, depending on where the item of evidence you'll be picking up. Personal safety items include glasses, nitrile gloves, Tyvek suits, and then just the security area, depending on what you're dealing with. It could be booby traps or other personal equipment that you'll require. So, and another item to consider is do not, if you're at a scene and you are clearing things, don't eat, drink, chew on the scenes. This will preserve us introducing items into the scene that shouldn't be there, and proper face masks, which everybody's been doing better now since we've had the COVID uptake. Everybody's getting better utilization of masks, but it helps with dealing with bodily fluids. And if you're conducting searches, be cognizant of the hypodermic needles in the areas and have proper containers available to collect them and to store them after. So safety is going to be the first item you want to take care of as far as any type of scene you're dealing with. It'd be a traffic stop, a situation where you're doing a search warrant and you're going to do a search and seizure in there to pick up evidence. And we're talking different scenarios here. So, you know, you'll be looking in different areas, seats, lockers, beds, tables. Be careful where you put your hands, especially if you're doing wildlife searches. There could be different types of animals in there that could be venomous. And anything that's there, you don't want to bring that home with you. So be cognizant of that. Determine the extent of the scene protection. And that's going to be based on scenario here. A lot of it's just, if you're on an outdoor remote area and you feel it's secure, it's yourself and you have nobody there, different than an urban environment where you have multiple people in the area. So having another team or having more security or calling in another fellow co-worker officer to help back up and provide security with you, hold what you got so you can get more people if need be. Always utilizing the best safety for yourself and not rushing into anything. So make sure you're going through all these items. You start to take notes of that as you're going. And at first, there'll be mental notes. But once we've established safety and we understand that, we're going to make sure our scene's protected and secured. And you'll establish that scene based on what you have there. If it's a home residence that you're doing, you'll need to you may need to pull out in the perimeter of the house and have staff available on the outside because you need to protect from others walking in. And if it's out in a remote area, you'll just make the scene secure as you need in that area. And have a mental note of what you'll delineate as a perimeter for your search area. At that point, anybody that's entering your scene should be recorded. You should have a ledger and or a log where you're able to record anybody entering your scene. And obviously, if it's outdoors, the weather could be a factor. So that's one thing we want to make sure you'll use common sense in that situation. We could talk about collection of evidence a certain way, but weather could dictate if it's an outside scene where you need to protect the evidence and secure it in a quick fashion. Because humidity and heat and or rain could just alter anything that's being recovered. As you walk through your scenes, make sure you note and jot down in your notes the recording of what's on. Do I have lights on? Is the temperature low in the house? Is it very cold or is it very hot? Do I have shades open? Is this item near a very large shaded ponderosa area where the decomposition would change, for example, a carcass that you're recovering? What type of smell do I have in the area? I know a lot of staff probably can go out to, I know I can go out to areas and I could smell certain decomposition now from a good distance. Be cognizant of other items in the area, liquids, bodily fluids, obviously, and unknown substances. And be mindful and jot down if a door was open, a door was locked. Those are good facts to have documented. Obviously, if you're dealing with a situation that you've made safe, weapons, if you can secure them, and jot down any pertinent information. Was the weapon loaded? How many rounds were with that weapon once you cleared it? Who the person was that cleared it? Going through clothing and bedding, obviously personal items. So when you're documenting, don't assume anything. Record everything you see. What appears to be might actually be something else. A good train of thought on doing some of these that helps out if you miss something is to do a video documentation once you're doing your initial assessment before you start to recover anything. This is vital in case there is something that's overlooked as far as a door open, and later on we needed to see why that door was open or locked, and it may lead to something else down the road. So it's good to have that initial video documentation of your scenes, and it could be as simple as out in a remote area, utilizing your camera in video mode and just doing a simple video of the ground and around the scene or the item that you're going to be recovering. So documentation and speaking with first responders, it's crucial because they may have different things they brought to that crime scene that you need to know of. For example, somebody that discovered an item out in the field and they report it to you. You want to know what type of foot impressions they have that they brought to that crime scene. And maybe they moved the item that was in question. So all that is, and it's okay, it's just good to document those items on your evidence. So initially you'll do a walkthrough. So this will give, if you're working with a team, so you can discuss this in different scenarios. At times you can do this by yourself if it's safe in a remote area, or you may have a team where you've discussed you're going to do this and you'd assign different scenarios to team members. One could be a sketch, one could be the photography, and another one could be security, for example. So you could have all these identified prior to arriving. So your walkthrough is done easy. And typically at that point, not everybody will do the walkthrough. You'll have a team leader or someone identified to do a walkthrough and point out items that are of importance or that would be seized as evidence, or that will be required to be picked up as evidence. So then a briefing can be done with the team and everybody will have an understanding, even to the person that's conducting the sketch of these items. So just remember, we'll even document trace findings in these situations. So we've established a perimeter. You have a clear path in and out, not always moving through different areas. So establish one. Make sure everybody's wearing protective personal equipment, gloves, any type of Tyvek suits, whatever is required at that point that you feel to reduce any introduction of DNA or anything into those scenes that you need to take precaution in. So typically, we want to collect trace evidence first, and that's the hair, fibers, soil, chips, glass, and dust, prints, because those items could be gone because of time, wind, or weather factors. If you have a pristine area indoors, it's locked, and you have good security over it, you may alter this. So it's not all set in stone. These are just some guidelines that are recommendations on things we've gone through. So make sure you look also for transient evidence, evident elements of physical evidence that might be expected to degrade or disappear. Sometimes prints in snow, for example, maybe it's not snowing at the time you get there, but it's starting to melt because of the sun. So that's something we may need to prioritize over photographs of the actual carcass that's in the areas. So prioritizing common sense, what you see on the scene, and some of these items will change based on scenarios. And that could include picking up items that or swabs of blood need to be picked up first because they're still wet, and it's a good time to take a quick photo and then swab that blood from a certain area. So it would keep it fresher. So some examples of the search guidelines. So obviously through that walkthrough, initially, you're just going to see items that are in plain view. And some of the items you have here, you're going to want to mark them with tent. There's a couple different ways. You can either mark them with a note card so everybody could see them, or if you have tent cards, you can put tent cards down like you see here in the slideshow. Those are always great. As simple as a note card bent in half, if you don't have these with the numbers on them, works sufficiently as well. Search entrances, obviously, and exits thoroughly. And always try to make a sketch of items that you're recovering. One, it's good to go back and you can place those items back where they were if need be, if the scene's recreated, and you can give an accurate description of where they were recovered from. For some reason, your photographs don't come out well, it's a good reference where items were collected within a scene. And when you conduct these sketches, there's a couple items you really like to add on that's important, and making sure you write not to scale and give a direction on there of north, so everybody knows where that room, a certain door would be facing, would be crucial for completing these sketches. You're always going to photograph an item of evidence with and without scale. So that's very important. And we'll go over specifics in this training as far as what type of photographs you want to go with. And scale is just meaning a ruler. I'll talk a little bit more about the photography when we get to those slideshows. But you do want to photograph with and without scale. Complete your packaging and secure it at the crime scene, making sure it's placed and sealed properly. And just make sure you look in all the areas and conduct a thorough search for any evidence you may be missing, and be cognizant of any trace evidence. Be slow, methodical, don't rush it. When we're doing this, you want to mark any evidence containers if you've placed items inside containers, so you know what you put in there. And at this point, if you have other individuals helping you, you may assign teams to be taking care of the evidence chain and logging all your items and ensuring all the written items on there are written appropriately to your chain of custody. So, here I wrote down wait for daylight when possible, depending on the type of crime and what you're investigating. Obviously, the daylight's the best because you're going to have the most light and visibility available to you. Look everywhere on your scenes. The best search options are usually the most difficult and time consuming. They do take time. All these items I'm discussing it's vigorous and it seems overwhelming, but it helps definitely put the case together well. So you can't ever over document, not overemphasizing that, the evidence that you're picking up. Start your search out cautiously and finish vigorously. That's some good information there. Remember, criminals are trying to prevent you from finding things. I'll dive into this portion here on different types of searches we'll be involved in. You could do indoor searches, obviously, outdoor, and then the types of search patterns. So there's several factors on an indoor search that contribute to what type of search you're going to conduct. Obviously the number of people that you have available to you. If you're a single unit, a single ranger out there, you may need to ask for help. Don't be afraid to call, slow it down, hold what you got, and try to get some more people in there to process these scenes properly. You may have a lot of contents in the area, and just depends on the layout of that area. So don't assume anything, and use your imagination. Anything is possible. On an outdoor search, we'll do the same type as an indoor. Determine your search needed. Your perimeter obviously is a lot different than you would have if it's a vehicle search, for example. You have the vehicle as your perimeter. I'm outdoors now. You're establishing that perimeter outdoors where you feel is necessary and where that crime could have occurred. For example, you could have a wildlife or some type of wildlife that's shot in a meadow, and you're perimeter may extend to the road because you need to search that area for brass or any type of rifle casings. So the perimeter there is going to be based on the type of environment you have on the exterior. So it may be large. And when searching these large areas, it may be best to just put them in segments or quadrants, search them in those grids. That way, you know, you've covered the areas required for a proper search outdoors. You could utilize these types of searches here, the 4 I've listed, and they're kind of the most common: indoor or outdoor, which is a strip search, a grid search, a spiral, and a zone. And I'll go over each one of them here. Obviously, if you're in a room, here, the search pattern is a strip, which is you're going in that room from one side of the wall to the other, and you reverse that, ensuring that each portion of that room is covered. You could take this same example and put it outdoors and quadrant out an area you feel on an outdoor search and utilize this. The grid pattern's the same, except you're adding in, coming across your back, you're double backing over these areas, which is a little more thorough depending on how you see things when you're going through it. So this could be helpful a lot based on lighting in the room or how you're dealing with the scenario there. This is for me, one of my favorite ways to search by myself is a spiral search, and typically either working your way out from the main focus of outdoors of an item and spiraling out, and tend to pick up lots of evidence this way if you're spiraling around an item and working your way out. On outdoor searches, you just got to be careful when you do your initial walkthrough that you're not obviously stepping over any type of foot or any type of impressions there. Once you've established them, well, then your spiral would change there a little bit. And zone searches, taking a certain area of that room and searching that area, going to the next zone, which this would work outdoors, what I would explain as a gridding it and incorporating maybe that with a spiral search. So those are the types of searches you can conduct on certain areas indoor, and you could take those same concepts and take them to an outdoor search as well. We'll discuss some more prioritization of collection. What we don't want is, you don't want loss, destruction, or contamination. So obviously loss, you could lose an impression based on weather. Destruction, it could be a certain area that is, you could lose that type of print because of moisture in a room, or you could contaminate it based on what's going on in your scene. So those are prioritizations, is not to lose it. If you need to collect it and that's the first priority, then you need to get that item recovered, whether it be a print or an item that needs to be picked up because weather is coming in. So focus on what's accessible areas in view. Out of view locations are different, but make sure you have a systematic search for evidence in your area. Selecting one of those methods, sticking to it, and then you could discuss that with individuals that are helping you search so items aren't missed. And that's typically when we'll miss something, is that if you have several people helping you. So communication is key, and ensuring that everybody's on the same sheet of music as we go through the searches. So least intrusive process to more processing is going to be better. And now that we've established where our evidence is at, what we have, we're going to move into photography. And photography, for me on this slideshow and on scenes, I guess the easiest way to put this for everybody, and if you're not a good photographer, is just you want to paint the picture of your crime scene with the photos. You basically want to capture everything that's out there and be able to look at those photographs again, and without your sketches, put them back in place where they were initially at. So it's going to tell the whole story with your photographs. And now we discussed videos of the scene. Those should be initial and then photographs. The types of photographs that will be essential would be overall photograph of an evidence item, an intermediate photograph, and close-up. And it's important to note that you keep all your photographs together. For example, I'll show you some photos as we go through here that may be out of focus, but it's not a good idea to delete them. Leave that out of focus photo in there and add it to your collection at the end, because it's part of your scene. Even though it was a bad photo, we still need to collect that and keep it in our evidence list, because it's still part of used as discovery for evidence, even though it was a bad photograph. So that's important as we go through this. But we want to do overalls, intermediates, and close-ups. And the main objective with some close-ups is a full framed with scale, meaning a ruler or some type of measurement item. And discussing that, I know sometimes we are out in the field, we may not have everything available because we have to go on maybe a hike to go out to an area, and we won't have maybe our ruler with us, or we forgot it. Utilize an item that could be measured after a writing utensil, your pen, a knife. We know that knife has a 4-inch blade on it. So we're able to reference how large an item is in a photo to your knife blade, to the pen. You know, you have your badge on, you need to put that down to measure. We know we have a good measurement on items to reference. And that's the big thing, is to make sure we get a reference size there in our close-up photographs. Here's a photograph of an overall. So we have one collar out there. On the overalls, you probably won't get specifics in it, but you're just trying to see where the item is laying in relationship. So we can have a clear, distinct view here that the overall photograph is this item's laying close to the asphalt. And what we'd want to do here is take it from every angle. Take an overall from all directions would be vital. And here's another overall. So here in this picture, you can't see specifics, but there's a raptor out there. We see there's a ponderosa tree line, and we see that there's some containers. So I would take this photograph. Right now, it's facing in the eastern facing. So we would just conduct the rest of the facings. Go on and do the same distance and take it from the north, south, and west. And then we're eventually going to work our photographs in from intermediate to a close-up. So intermediate, we're getting a little bit closer here. You're going to be about an 8-foot distance, possibly 8 to 10. And it's all scenario based. You may not be able to get all these photographs based on what is happening. You might be close to a cliff edge and you're not able to get the photograph that faces to the south because of that. So get the best amount of photographs you can get. And the best option is to review those photos and make sure that they're in focus. Here's another intermediate. We have an idea here that there's a collar on this wolf. We can see that it's in the grassy area, and I can tell you it's laying on its left side. So not a lot of detail, but we're getting closer here on what items are as intermediate. A lot better than the overalls. So on that intermediate, you couldn't tell what's in the background necessarily, but you know what's the item is. So close up here, you want a full frame photograph to scale. So to scale is meaning adding that ruler in there. So we know the measurements of, and if we need to get them referenced, we can. So now I can tell you that there's some pink inside this GPS collar versus when I couldn't tell you that on an intermediate. So those are kind of items you're looking for, a lot more detail as far as close-ups go for those photographs. Here's a close-up of an item here. It's to scale. Maybe it's so large, you'll have to segment up your close-ups because the animal's so large. And maybe you'll have different types of wounds that on close-ups you'll have to go back through, and you'll need multiple shots to capture all those wounds as you go through it. Some things that could occur and you need to keep an eye out as you're doing photography is shadowing. You may have a great distance, you might have a good view of your item or close-up, but you've got a shadow based on the way the sun is. So to improve on your photography, ensure you're not shadowing. Obviously, review your photos if you can as you go, and try to ensure everything is in focus. And ensure your placement of your rulers in a place where, or your item of reference, where you're able to go back and actually reference it. So placement of the item within the full shot will help go back and identify anything on items. And that'll be real crucial when you're photographing foot impressions. And most importantly, we've discussed all the foot photos we're going to take, maybe 50 photos. Well, you're not going to remember when you get done why you took the 25th photo. So it's best if you jot down and take a photo log sheet of all your photographs as you go. It'll save you time instead of going back and having to go through each photo. I've done that before, and you can do it. It's just very time consuming after to have to go and log all your photos. So if you can keep a log as you're taking photos, for example, one GPS collar, that's intermediate, and then the third picture is a close-up. If you're taking 5 or 6 pictures, it's not as hard, but keeping a photo log sheet is crucial, because you can go back 18 months later, 2 years later, and I can tell you why those photos were taken and how they're relevant to the photo log sheet and evidence. So that's important. You know today, you may not know 2 years from now why you took them. So the photo log sheet's very crucial. So now we've gone through the process, and we can start picking up this evidence now. We've recorded its location. How do we go about recording location? Well, if you're out in a remote location, you may be just utilizing a GPS over a carcass to get a certain location. You could use different methods. If it's in a room, you may be able to triangulate that item and utilizing a certain area and putting that same specific knife back in the room where it was at before by certain measurements. And you could take a measurement from a location in that room. For example, if you wanted to use the jam front door at the jam there, and measure from the front door to the tip of the knife to the end of the knife, and mark your measurements on your processing sheet, then you would be able to place that item back where it was at. Most importantly, once that item's collected, who picked it up? And if anybody's in the room that witnessed it as well, is going to be crucial to know that. This is going to establish the chain of custody for that item as we go along the process. So you'll secure that item, and it's identified. It's one GPS collar, labeled number 123. I would write the date and the name collected. So the next item would be to package your items and package them appropriately. Sometimes you're going to need to use bags versus plastic bags. Paper bags may be better because they will not deteriorate any type of fingerprints you're trying to collect at the time. So you'll be able to describe these weapons and how they're secured in the bags prior. Obviously, if you're securing weapons or long arms, ensure that you have them safe prior to bagging them. Whatever method you need to utilize to render those weapons safe. So, avoid handling evidence too much. Once it's secured and put away, we usually like to get it to the evidence locker and secured, so the transportation is clean. Wear clean gloves once you pick up one item. If need be, I'm going to go choose to pick up another item. You're going to change gloves out or double glove. So we're not cross-contaminating type of recovery when we pick up that evidence. Do not go to different scenes. So if you don't want somebody that's just recovered an item in a different part of the room coming over to pick this up without having new set of gloves. So we're not introducing or cross-contaminating anything here on evidence collection. If possible and required, use shoe coverings so you can dispose of those when you leave the scene. if you're having to utilize a blade to recover an item, make sure that blade is new. You don't want to have to use your knife blade to cut into something. If you're taking a sample of tissue from an elk, you want to utilize a sterile, fresh blade, and that blade's never been used before. And that way you're not taking anything and cross-contaminating that item we're going to utilize for evidence. So be careful with the cross-contamination and utilize bags as necessary. And one thing I'd like to put out to everybody here is, as far as evidence goes, feel free to contact any of the agents or myself, and we're able to help you out. We definitely can. And I say consult the laboratory, but if you're sending any items that we're discussing here, they may have a certain process on how they want items recovered, as far as maybe it's a tissue sample from an elk or blood, and how they want that package. So it's best, and I'm just giving some items on review here on what our lab recommends, but always getting with the laboratory you're going to send it to. That's the best method of going through the items so they're properly sent and they can be sampled to get your tests done that you need. So just going over that portion of it. Packaging of those items is important. For example, DNA items. A lot of times we don't want to put a DNA item if we're going to do it. For example, a can that may have a print, you may not want to put that in a zip or plastic type bag. You may want to use a paper bag, because you may use that bag may get condensation and cause a print to come off of a can, where the paper bag would be a better option. So utilizing those different types of bags would be helpful. And other items that could be difficult to do is be picking up like samples, soil samples. So like you could use different types of containers. For example, you'll see the photo with a gun on top. Use zip ties if you don't have that you could run through the chamber to render it safe, so somebody couldn't just utilize that, and making sure that weapon's clear, obviously, before we secure it. So utilizing all those to render weapons safe, or a box with a blade in it, making sure that that blade's secure, because it won't hurt you or somebody else having to open it after. You can always use unused paint cans for items. These are good. If we've discussed here, you guys discussed before, cell phones. So they say if you heavy duty tinfoil on the digital media, if you cover it at least 3 times, should be sufficient. So items can be removed digitally, cell phones or other. So those are good items to have. They're static free bags. They have some that you can purchase, but those are ways to do it without having to get expensive. Those cans are good if you need to put hypodermic needles in, and you can close the can, and it keeps you from getting poked. Just label it properly and seal those items with evidence tape, and we'll discuss packaging of it. On the package, you want a date of your search, the item and the description with the tent card number, so they're relevant together. Typically, you'll put your tent cards in order, and they'll be referenced the same as your evidence is listed. Describe where you picked up the item, where it was found, who was the collector, and name and initials. If there's a witness, your case number, and an evidence number if feasible. Here, the lab recommends for us, if we're sending items dry, keep it dry. If it's wet, keep it wet, meaning the wet part is describing items that are flesh or that you're sending up there to get tested by the lab. So that's the practice that they recommend. But you may have instances where you have blood on a knife or blood on a shirt that you may want it to be air dried prior to packaging it, so it stays better, that those items within the placement and doesn't spoil within the packaging after time. Once we've had items and we've sealed them, and you'll utilize dates and an initial over your seal. that's like one of the first questions we discuss is, how do you know that this is the item? Well, I know that that item I collected was a GPS collar because I sealed it, and those are my initials that you've opened that evidence bag with. So that gives you a little, it's an indirect marking, because you're not directly marking the evidence, but you're marking the container that the evidence went in. So it gives you a reminder as well, and everybody knows that the evidence wasn't tampered with at that point or has not been opened. Or you could see if it was ripped at a certain point. So this will give you the best option to verify and validate items of evidence as they're submitted. Carcass packaging. So typically items are frozen and then they're submitted to the lab based on time of day and shipments. So like I recommend, you're talking to us, we can give us a call, we'll walk through it, but our pathology department recommends that sometimes we freeze them. Sometimes they want items that are submitted fresh, like a condor, because of the types of tests that would be conducted to find out the type of cause of death. They do have odor kits that we could probably assist getting to you guys if you need. So reach out to us. We discussed this, tissues, muscle tissue or organ tissue are best sources of DNA if you need to take sampling. Like if you have a carcass out there and, for example, we have a gut pile at a certain, or some blood in the gut pile, but you don't have the whole carcass at a campsite. But I think it's important that I take some samples here so I could reference them later, and maybe I could tie this into something because you might get some more information down the road. So if you're just taking samples, those are the best to take. Wet blood samples could be collected, just swab them with a cotton swab or gauze and place them in a smaller container when they dried out. It just minimizes having the blood or the animal present that's swabbed there, because we could probably tie DNA. Maybe that individual took that carcass and that elk is now in his freezer at the house. Well, now we can tie both items together because we have a good DNA from a campsite to collection from his house. So that's why evidence is important. Package your sample and then talk to the lab on what we're trying to do. So I have that in there, but best here is let's just talk to the lab on what we're going to do with the items. So a big thing is just prevent cross-contamination. Some of the most important things once we've completed all these items is the documentation. We utilize an evidence submittal form to submit our items to the laboratory for any testing. Like I said, usually the agents or I will discuss these items with the pathologist, what we would need to send up. A lot of times we're trying to figure out cause of death. We may be trying to figure out genetics on an item. So there's a lot of those things that we can help out with, but we do need these items that come with it as well. Chain of custody form. If you collected these items and we need to know, maybe your coworker picked it up, but our chain of custody is not together. So those are some of the items we need to keep a list of all the evidence you have, and the process of the tags that we utilize are seizure tags and our evidence tags, and sealing your evidence bag as well. Here are some of the items that are important to keep up with and making sure our data matches when we send them up. So on your left, I'm not sure the type of chain of custody documentation you have, but in general, you want to ensure that it's listed and it's going to follow the individual from whoever's basically had possession of the item until it's secured. So if I collected the item and I pass it off to Agent Ruiz and she secures that item in the Albuquerque RAC office, she's going to list her name on there now because she transported and secured it. And maybe Agent Roper needs to take that item out to submit it to the lab because we're not available. But he would be the third individual as well involved on this chain of custody. But then we have a good list of who is involved with sending the items to where, from the inception of where it was collected until it's secured. And that includes sending the items off to the laboratory. We do follow chain of custody there. But that's what's important on what I'd like to tie in with everybody here is tribal cases as well. If you're collecting an item and maybe this case is going to be transferred over, as Agent Ruiz discussed, Lacey Act, and there's a Lacey Act violations with certain items that are collected, we need to still follow a chain of custody record, and it's vital just to keep this whole process going. And it helps with a presentation of these to the attorney's office when we present these cases, having a good evidence and documentation that comes with it. Typically, this evidence submittal form those items that we take care of, but I just put them there so everybody's kind of aware of how the process goes. But the ultimate is the chain of custody is vital, important through this process. This is a document form that we utilize the number of the form. We add our case number on there, and you just want to kind of mimic the same. If you don't have a chain of custody, have this type of information on a document, the date and time of the seizure, the number of the item that you recovered, item numbers that are transferred. For example, you transfer it to the lab, you transfer it to me, the name of the agency you work for, put my name on there, person you release it to, and date of the release, if it's released. So you're following that item from the inception of recovery as an evidence to the time the item's completely closed out as a case and what you have done with that item of evidence at that point. So chain of custody is important. I'm not sure if we have any questions, Robert, but I just want to just touch on this as far as we kind of discussed it, but how is this important for me in a tribal court setting? You might be asking yourself that question. I say it's very important if you could follow all these methods, even if you're conducting a DUI stop and you picked up an open container of alcohol in there, because you still have a chain that could be followed and that evidence is secured, and you're just doing good protocol on a case that you're conducting. And maybe you pick up or you do a swab of an elk at a campsite, there's nobody around and nothing's going on. And later on that item comes up that it's a Lacey Act violation and you followed all this protocol. You're able to present these items and firmly say, I know that I secured them. We have a chain of custody, and you're able to give us that. And once we present the case to the attorney's office, it makes it such a strong case and an easier presentation that all the boxes are checked appropriately. So it makes it a stronger case. I got any other questions you think there, Robert, that may come up as far as evidence goes?
I'll throw that out to the group. We've got a couple here. So there's some people that have bounced in and out, Bobby, but I do want to ask one relative to just laboratory support. In a lot of situations, the tribes may not have an avenue to submit any evidentiary items to a particular lab for analysis. So I'll throw this out to the group that's with OLE. What methods exist now to help tribal officers get some of the evidentiary items analyzed forensically?
I'll speak for myself. On some of the items I've submitted have been because they've been tied to ESA cases. I'm not sure if Adrian or Jelivan can speak to others that are just standalone on as far as what the laboratory's capabilities are for assistance. But if not, Robert, I'll reach out to them and I'll see what is available for sure.
Go ahead, Jelivan.
You know, we're always willing to support the tribes in any way we can, especially if it's a wildlife / conservation investigation. And if that means helping submit evidence to the lab, we can do that. Obviously, it's always going to depend on the lab's abilities based on their caseload as to whether they can take some of those cases or not. So we will have to discuss that beforehand. I know currently some of the staffing at the lab has been reduced. So we don't, like ballistics is kind of tough for us to run. We actually we send it to the forensics lab and it gets processed by an outside agency for that matter. So it's going to depend on a case by case basis, but we'd be willing to discuss with any tribal officer that needs assistance with such a matter. So.
Okay. Yeah, so for any of those officers that are out there, the key is just to reach out to the service for assistance, potential assistance, and then go from there with any guidance that's coming from OLE.
Yes, that's what I would recommend.
Okay. And then one more follow-up, because I think this is pretty common, Bobby, is, for any case where an officer does happen to take in evidence or sees that somebody's phone, I know you mentioned wrapping that up in foil 2 or 3 times to secure it, maybe put it in one of those empty paint cans so it doesn't get damaged. But does the phone, would you recommend that the phone stays on at that particular point when you put it in and the battery just dies? Or do you, would you prefer to have folks turn it off and then seal it up?
For phones, because we're not sure at what point they could be extracted, it's recommended they stay on. They say sometimes they recommend put it to airplane mode, but keep it on, and once you keep it in there, it would be fine. So that way it's not manipulated.
And then at that point, obviously, you do not try to open the phone to get into any applications thereof, because at that point, you'd be wanting to do that strictly with the authority of a search warrant, correct?
Correct. You may be in violation, or that could be suppressed because it's not approved at that point.
Okay. Appreciate it. Anybody else have any questions for Bobby here? I know that's a lot of information, very detailed. Appreciate that. I mean, you covered quite a bit. I think this recording here is going to be very beneficial for folks just to go back and look through and reread some of the.
Yeah, it'd be great to not be in the virtual world and go out and pick up some items and review it that way. So next time we get an opportunity to go out and do some field practice and kind of tie it all together, it would be great. So thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, and with that said, we talked a little bit before. I think in the future we'll be working together in person, and we can go through some of these scenarios, do some different types of activities, relative to evidence gathering and stuff, submittal, chain of custody, et cetera. So thanks a bunch. I appreciate it, Bobby. Appreciate your time. Right now,